Heyo, you're listening to Edge Coach Quip, featuring our very own Edge coaches and community, dropping knowledge nuggets to fuel your day. Hello all, welcome to episode 119 of Coach Quip. I'm Coach Robyn.
I'm Coach Chris.
And today
we are talking about
base
training.
All about that base.
I know, I can't say it without the song in my mind.
Right, now it's in my head.
But yes, today we are all about that base, talking about base training. What is it? Why do we do it? What does it look like in different sports? And why you should be doing it too.
So we get this question a lot this time of year because in theory, if you have sort of that normal training cycle that a lot of seasonal places like Chicago have right now or soon, around the turn of the new year, you will enter into what we call base training. So what is base training? That's probably a good place to start.
Yeah.
Base training is really the first phase of a training cycle. We'll get into more details than that, of course, but just know that it really is what allows us to build that aerobic foundation. We're talking about endurance sports. It really is the most important part of how we feel good, how we don't get injured, how we improve, all of the above. It's really when we start to prepare for major events, but really think of it easing in effort-wise. I love base training because I think it's really approachable. If you've taken a break or even if you're new to a sport, it's a pretty easy to understand, simple, aerobic, conversational effort, which means, I don't know about you, but if I have been sedentary for a while, that's the thing that's going to kind of demystify it and make me want to start again, is to say, we're not going to go hard, we're just going to get out there and move. And it's that type of effort. It's also what you revert to when you're in between events, which we'll get into a little bit more too.
Yeah, are there any other terms that you call base training?
No, but you said you do.
Well, yeah, I wonder, like, have you ever called it maintenance training?
Maintenance would work.
Is this the same as what you would consider off-season training?
That's a good question. I think it kind of depends. If we are racing at all in the off-season, some people do still race and want to kind of perform but keep their overall volume down, then I probably wouldn't call it base. But if it's truly between those, A events and you don't have anything planned and you're just kind of maintaining that big aerobic bubble, then yeah.
Yeah. So I think I've called it some people really like the term off-season, and I think off-season kind of is sneaky base training.
Yep.
For some people, off-season fully is, time off or a really unstructured time period, usually, 1 or 2 weeks after the last A race, then moving into this base or maintenance training phase. But yeah, let's talk about the phases of training. So we said that base training is one of several training phases that an athlete might have throughout the year. And this would be the starting place, the foundation, which we'll talk more about what base training actually looks like coming up in the bonus miles. And then there is our build or strength or threshold phase. I typically call this the build phase.
Same.
And people have different building blocks, and that makes a lot of sense, right? You're stacking those bricks, as you would say. And then we have our peak phase or your speed phase, depending on what you're training for. And then we have our taper right before that race. And then you have your recovery phase afterwards. We've talked about the reverse taper would be part of that recovery phase. And you can go back to past episode on both taper and recovery phase or reverse taper in the past.
All right, so we've got base, build, peak, taper, and recovery. The two that we're going to focus on today really are base for the most part, and then we'll refer to build just a little bit.
Yep. All right, so Training Peaks actually says that the base period is the time where an athlete is training to train, not training to race. And I like that idea because while you are thinking about maybe future races, you're building this foundation. And as you said, none of the actual racing stuff, the speed or the power stuff can actually happen if you don't have that aerobic base through the base phase.
Yeah, so this brings us to maybe what I love the most of the why, right? Like, why do we do base training? We get this question a lot, and I think that people sometimes feel, if they feel really good, that they should be doing more. But at the end of the day, the answer is you shouldn't. Maybe volume, but definitely not effort. So no matter what, your body can only support so much of this speed training that we do start to see more of when we get into the build phase, which is right after the base phase, right? And if you do too much speed training throughout too much of the year, you risk, frankly, overtraining and being injured. So When you enter that build phase, so that's the second phase again, there's always going to be more speed work, which is going to raise the amount of stress on your body, right? And your body cannot sustain that year round, nor should it have to. The pros definitely don't do that, right? They take things way, way, way down. So what's going to happen if you go too hard for too much of the year is your body's going to be overtired, overtrained. God bless, you might even get an injury, right? And the net result is going to be that you are overall slower than when you started, which is usually not what we want to do with training, or you might have to stop altogether, right? So to manage the fact that our bodies can't handle doing a ton of stress year round, we need to keep the build phase of training as truncated, which is why it's the second phase of training, and we need it just long enough to make the fitness gains. This is why it's really important to get training plans from people that you trust, whether it's, coaches, or if you have an online option, and not try to write them on your own or piece together other ones, because I'll tell you what, those ratios of especially the first two phases, base and build, are usually specific to a much bigger meta plan that you will want to overall follow. So we do want to keep build as little as we need to make the biggest gains, which means that we need less stressful exercise before it, hence base. I like to think about this as the cart and the horse, right? So the old adage of you can't put the cart before the horse, it rings true in this scenario too. So base is absolutely the horse. It is the thing that is generating the power for you to be able to pull the cart, and that cart is absolutely the speed training. So in all instances, you got to have the horse before you get the cart.
I like it.
All right, stay tuned for all of the other details, the what and the how and the goals of base training coming up in your bonus miles.
All right, bonus miles, talking about our base training. What does that look like? Let's start off with how long your base period should be. So depending on a couple of factors, including when your race is in the future, how long that race is going to be, and if you're coming off of injury or a period of time where you haven't been training as much, that base period can be up to about 12 weeks. And I think for most of us as coaches are building the base period as 6 to 12 weeks, depending on how much time, how long of a runway you have before your first event. So we sort of build this, we back out from our A races, building in that taper time, our peak time, our build time, and then our base time before that. So again, it really depends on how long your runway is, but it can be anywhere between that 6 and 12 week period. And longer is better if you have the opportunity to build that foundation, because we are making the foundation for all of that speed work and strength and power to come later on. We don't get that unless we have that solid foundation.
Another thing to note too about build, base, any of those, right, is that we will typically increase our mileage for 2 to 3 weeks at a time and then cut it back for recovery. And when we say recovery, we're not talking about that fifth phase recovery. We're talking about like a recovery week or a recovery chunk. That is also what allows for fitness to happen. So during base, it's not like total miles. We go 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, right? We might go 30, 35, 40, and then on the recovery, take it down to 25, and then come back to 35, 40, 45, bring it back to 30. And that we need, 6 to 12 weeks to be able to give you that volume build and recovery weeks safely and smartly and let your body make all of those wonderful fitness adaptations.
All right, so what does our base training actually look like?
That is a good question. And this is another one we get too, a lot. So why am I only going easy? It's like, okay, well, let's look at what it actually is to begin with. So it is an aerobic zone. Aerobic, very much chill, right? So we are going to be talking about zone 1, zone 2, easy AF. I know you all know what that means by now. If not, you can refer to all prior episodes. It's not necessarily all slow and stagnant at the same exact speed, but we are going to be shifting gears all only in the aerobic zone and never really getting uncomfortable or hard. It's all about increasing the amount of work your muscles can accomplish while using a lot of oxygen, right? Without using our anaerobic energy sources. We want to be able to be super conversational. If we're doing something, we should be able to talk just like this.
Right.
Super nerdily. Aerobic endurance and speed. Aerobic endurance is like the biggest bulk, but then any type of speed that is worked in there is going to be a skill. So it's a technique, not a deposit, right? I always say, like for instance, right now I have the wind runners ending a lot of their speed runs with 200 at mile pace. And they'll do 2 to 4 of them, 200, which is, pretty fast. And then they'll do 200 super easy. So moving time wise, they're getting way more easy than they are hard. And I always say it's a skill, not a deposit. Like you should not feel like these are taxing you. You should feel like you're just kind of opening it up and feeling good. Similar to strides, right?
Yep.
It's a good example. Think in general, anything that's going to help you build a big aerobic engine, right? So we want that zone 1, zone 2, super conversational to just be a beefcake of a training module when you're done. That is what's going to equal the big foundation, right? Again, when we'll talk about building a house, we're building the basement foundation all the way to those little creepy windows that are above the ground with your base phase, and then your build phase is where you're actually stacking the bricks for the first floor. I'm guessing everybody's going up, not out. Other things that we'll see in strength training, what it might look like is, and we'll get into with some examples too, strength training. Oh, that's right. This is going to be a future episode, probably next week. So please tune in for that one, as well as prehab. So making sure that we know how to properly move symmetrically, powerfully to, again, build that better foundation. We don't need any cracks.
Yeah, in this base training period where we have a focus on strength work and that aerobic, chat pace, just building up our ability for our lungs to not be the first thing to fail, I think that we see that all come together in the build and the peak phase. But you have to have a little bit of faith
Absolutely.
in it.
Patience.
Absolutely. Patience in the base period. Because so many of us were doing a lot of specific speed work, tempo work, hills, all of these very specific race-focused workouts. And the truth is your base training is not going to be that. So it might seem a little less interesting, right? Like I have athletes who really love the intervals and the different, touching 5K pace and mile pace in different workouts. But you're going to do a lot of easy chat pace in this base period. And I think it takes a lot of patience, and you also have to embrace it, right?
Yeah.
Like to just know that this is your sort of reset, but you only get faster later in the season if you dedicate yourself to being really easy right now.
All right, examples. I love a continuous swim. So just being able to increase your minutes and your distance. Again, keeping it wildly aerobic. You should feel very fluid. You might even, if we're doing this right, find a state of flow and lose count of laps. 2 thumbs up. Second is going to be like an easy or a flush spin. We're looking at primarily like zone 1, especially if you haven't been on a bike in a while. You're probably not even going to get to zone 2 on this. Totally cool to do stuff during the week, and then maybe one longer effort on the during the week, but we don't need more than one long effort a week. From a run standpoint, again, easy AF. So for us, that usually translates on our pace chart to marathon plus 45 to 60. Sometimes I write even all the way up to 120 seconds on top of your goal marathon pace. One of those efforts can absolutely be longer during the week. This is where I encourage everybody to run somewhere different, get out on the trail. I know right now we're in the middle of our road to trail season, and I also just love trail, so maybe I'm being a little influenced by this, but when our athletes go out there, they just feel lighter, right? They don't care as much about their pace. The trail is really kind of dictating the pace, as well as kind of the effort is always staying light because everyone's calling out obstacles or chit-chatting, and it just really helps those easy AF miles or effort go by without them getting bored, right? So it's a nice way to kind of stave it off. And from strength training. So strength training during base, what it can look like. We basically want you to do more of it, right? So 2 to 4 times a week would be awesome versus like maybe in build or those peak phases, you're looking at like 1 to 3 times a week. So 1 to 2 extra a week, 2 thumbs up. And this is where you want to add in anything that might be a little bit heavier. This is the great time to do it. We love to put a little muscle on our frame, make sure you're still eating enough protein to be able to do that. But your heavier lifts fit exactly here, which is interesting because we're saying don't run too hard, but you can absolutely lift heavier during this phase. Last but not least, mobility, all those prehab things. This is the greatest time for us to correct imbalances, make sure that we are building that foundation as symmetrically and beautifully as possible.
And I think this is part of the reason why I've heard people call it a maintenance phase, or like, the role here is to really fix a lot of the things that we've acquired over the last season. So it might be some strength deficiencies on one side that's affecting our gait, or mobility issues, right? This is the opportunity to do the skill work. So you had mentioned sort of doing pickups at the end of a run. I actually have some of my athletes doing drills, like stepping
footwork
drills, footwork drills right now.
We have those on deck for the trail group this Thursday.
Wonderful.
Yep.
It is the season in base period to do all of these things. And then mobility-wise, strength-wise, it's about putting the muscle back on that we lost over the last year. One of my athletes on Monday night was talking about pull-ups and how they were doing pull-ups before marathon training, and then let that strength component kind of slip or just let it go willingly because they were dedicating more time to running and to lower body fitness or core work, and now they're trying to get back into that upper body strength again. And this is really the time to do that, because as endurance athletes, we're losing muscle during some of our race periods if you're not consistently strength training.
Yeah.
So this is that time to reset your body to get ready and prepare for that next training season.
Lucky for you, we have strength training here at Edge, morning, noon, and night. And we also always have scalable options. So if you do want to level down, level up, we have those. And we also have 2 mobility classes a week on Tuesday and Friday mornings now. This was something that people asked for. I was like, are you going to come? They're coming.
Yeah.
Yep, they're here. And it's awesome because it's right after a 30-minute strength. They go straight into 30-minute mobility. And guess what? That's a twofer, saving you a shower.
We know you love that. Also, I'm coaching the Friday morning one, and it's one of my favorite classes of the week now. This is something that I've wanted for a long time. It gives me a chance to stretch a little bit too as I'm coaching it, and I've seen people say they feel so much better. All of this stuff, we have the best intentions as we have a training plan for strength work, for mobility, for whatever. But those are the first 2 things that we drop once our running schedule becomes higher volume, or our cycling, or if you're doing triathlon, right? You have a lot of things to pay attention to, and this is the time to build those up so that you can carry in a more sustainable version of that as you hit that build phase and beyond.
I also think doing them with people is the key.
Yeah, absolutely.
For me, personally.
Absolutely. Yep. All right, let's talk about the goals of base training. So the goals of base training, very similar to our goals of Easy AF pace, since Easy AF pace is about 80% of your base training. So the first one is to increase our aerobic endurance. That's building the big foundation part that we've talked about already. Second one would be musculoskeletal durability. So you've talked a lot about this, about prepping your joints, your muscles, your tendons for that bigger load, right? Number 3 is to begin training your central nervous system so that the communication pathways between your brain and your muscles are efficient once we start to add more speed work or work that requires a little bit more brain power.
I love that one.
Yeah, you would. You're nerdy.
Yeah.
Very nerdy. That's a very nerdy goal.
That's a good one.
Number 4 is to improve our muscular strength to prevent injuries. So a lot of this base building is that sort of prehab that you mentioned before. It's making sure that we will be injury-free moving forward, and that's a big part of the strength training component of our base training. And then to prepare for the transition into more challenging workouts. So again, this is all about building that base. And then when you have that foundation of I can sustain easy pace for X amount of time, you start to layer on more of that speed, that tempo. And if you've ever followed a training plan, you've seen this in action. When you write the Chicago Marathon training plan or our Shamrock Shuffle training plan, we see our introduction to our speed work is shorter intervals, time-based, and then you watch that grow throughout the season. That is our build phase, and this is just getting you ready for that introduction. All right, to recap, so what are our phases of training? We had our base phase, which is what we were talking about here, our build phase, our peak phase, taper, and our recovery phase.
All right, why do we do it? We do it to get to that build phase, right? So checking that box of base phase means that we have great aerobic and muscular endurance, and that we are able to sustain those loads that are going to have a little bit more stress to them.
Yep. And how long does it take? Somewhere between 6 to 12 weeks, depending on what you're training for and how far of a runway you have before that big race.
And don't go mixing and matching training plans. No. That's the important one. And what does it look like? Swim, bike, run, lift, mobility, all of those things are components. If we were talking about swim, bike, run, largely aerobic efforts, it's cool to have one longer effort a week. Strength, increase your frequency, lift a little heavier, and mobility, reduce those imbalances. So the more mobility, the better.
And the goals of base training to increase your endurance, to increase your musculoskeletal endurance and capacity, basically to prepare your body to take on a greater load once you move into the build phase.
All right, now everybody knows why it really is all about that base. Thanks for listening, everyone. Till next time. Thanks for listening to Coach Quip, original music performed by Mend. Follow us online on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at Edge Athlete Lounge. Our podcast lives in the blog section of our website. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review this podcast, and you can check out the show notes for additional ways to contact us. Ready, set, onward we go.